Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Welcome back to another episode on the daily pit stop. Now, this is a post-season Yap. As you can see on the screen, it will be on the 2024 F1 driver rankings. Now, first of all, I just want to say a happy new year, happy 2025. I'm recording this as of the 1st of January 2025, and I know this season's ended about 2 to 3 weeks ago, so doing this video sounds really late, but I mean, you know, with all the football stuff's coming around, it's been a very hectic couple of weeks. And yeah, the football just took precedence over Formula One. And obviously, I think it also gave time for a lot of the Formula One news to come in. Who was going to fill up the final seat on the grid? Was Perez going to get booted out? Evidently, he did. And some other things have gone on the grid as well for 2025. But yes, I've got my driver rankings here. It's only for 23 drivers, however. It doesn't include Jack Doohan because he only did one race, and I felt that would be a little bit unrepresentative. Yes, it does include Oliver Bearman. I think he's done about three races. I think one with Ferrari, two with Haas. I think that can probably suggest something at least coming into next year. So yeah, it's gonna be quite a bit here to talk about. Of course, with the news as well about Perez leaving and then Liam Lawson getting the Red Bull seat, and of course Isaac Hadjar is gonna take over for that RB seat as well. Yes. Whether or not this is going to be the last daily pit stop video, I really don't know. I mean, as I said, you know how football has taken too much, and if I were to continue uploading both concurrently at the same time, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And based on what I've seen with the football side of the things, the traction has been pretty good. But of course, if the F1 traction starts to pick itself up again with this video and maybe subsequent few videos, like a little bit of a post-season videos, and I may try it again when the new season comes around, and just to see if, you know, the schedule can fit, etc. I mean, if it does work, fantastic, we'll stick to that. But if it doesn't, maybe you know, these might be one of the very few last videos on this daily pit stop. And obviously the football side will still continue because I think that has been doing pretty well so far. But regardless, I'm not giving up on this just yet. So drop a like on the video if you guys have enjoyed this series. That's fine. Of course, subscribe if you are new around here. But yes, let's jump right in. Okay, so I just want to make this clear that I did all these rankings immediately after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. So it was very clear cut. I just decided to do this on the onset. I just didn't have the time to record, and I just didn't have the time to, obviously after this, I don't know if I have the time to edit, and I need to find time to upload this particular video. As I said, I don't know when this video is going to come out. What you're going to see, as I said, are my direct, immediate rankings of the drivers. Ultimately, whether or not I agree with now is another thing altogether. I will just be trying to, at the same time, drop back the rationale behind some of my choices that I've made. Yeah, I'm seeing this as fresh as you. So, you know, it's been 2 to 3 weeks since I did this. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. So we're going to start with 23rd place. And I think it's no surprise here who belongs in that particular list. It's going to be Logan Sargent. Now, you understand that. You've got to understand that he's had 1 year with Williams, obviously, last season. And I think there are some signs of positivity. Yes, he was still really crash happy, but I think to a certain extent, I think there was a little bit of potential that we could have seen in Logan Sargent. I think it wasn't going to look too bad in my opinion. I think Williams giving him another chance made sense. He has shown what he can do in the, you know, lower tiers, you know, Formula 2 and Formula 3, Formula 4, etc., and all the other lower ranked motor racing championships, etc. I think Logan tried to a certain extent. I think maybe as well the pressure's got too much into him. But ultimately, you know, he's only got 1 point. Of course, that point came with, I think, some eliminations. I think that time it was Austin Grand Prix 2023. I think Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc both got a DSQ for that one. That was how Logan Sargent got a point, and that was his only point in his Formula One career. Will he come back to Formula One? I think that is honestly probably not going to happen. But again, looking at the season 2024, crashed too much, and the car showed there was potential. I mean, if you look at Colapinto, he has shown what the car can deliver. Whether or not, again, driving style came into you know, consideration, whether or not he was going to drive well, etc., I'm not too sure. But based on what we're seeing, you know, when Albon is still able to put in really consistent performances, but Sargent wasn't, and when he got booted out and Colapinto came in, immediately scored points for Williams. So that's another thing altogether. I think you've got to admit that it's just been a diabolical season from Logan Sargent. He's been hovering at the back for just too long. In my opinion, that's just not good enough. And yeah, I just think he deserves to stay at 23rd. Right, moving on to 22nd. I think also not too much of a surprise here. It would be Lance Stroll. Again, you know, just ultimately, in my opinion, he's lost that passion really. I think he was at Williams and he was at Racing Point. I mean, he's still at the same team, but at Racing Point, I felt like when it was still Racing Point, when he was alongside Sergio Perez, I felt there was something in him that could have just continued to deliver as a driver. I felt there was potential in him to create something. And obviously, that pole position at Turkey, that was also something, I think, the highlight of his career. He can show that he's really happy making such achievements. But since, the new Aston Martin, for example, Sebastian Vettel, now Fernando Alonso, he's been getting wiped off the floor constantly. I don't know if that has done anything to his confidence. I mean, in the media, as we've seen the entirety of the season, he's just been very uninterested the whole time, or disinterested, and just, yeah, showed no signs of intent when it comes to putting performances on the racetrack. Obviously the car has been great, and of course, maybe that, with the expectation of whether or not the car was going to be great, maybe played into that, whether or not he was going to do well this year. But ultimately, I still feel that, this is clearly not a Formula One driver again. I feel like just because the dad owns the team, that's exactly why, he's still at the team. But otherwise, I think if it was just a normal driver, he would immediately be kicked out. And I think ultimately, in my opinion at least, what Fernando Alonso is doing with the team is impeccable, right? Even when the car's not at its best, he's still trying to eke out performance. And with Lance Stroll, he's doing the complete opposite ultimately, in some sense, hijacking a possible trajectory of the team. When the car was so good in 2023, Fernando Alonso just really made the best out of the car, and that's how he finished fourth in the Drivers' Championship. They had a really, really good first half of the season, Aston. Lance Stroll didn't make the best out of it, and I think had he been, I wouldn't say up there with Alonso, but pretty close, or to a certain extent, there's that we can see, similarities in the way the results are being delivered. That would have really helped Aston Martin again to climb maybe a little bit more in the constructors. Ultimately, you've got to understand that it's a team sport, right? And the prize when it comes to the constructors is not about the drivers. Drivers is all about glory, and where you finish in the championship is the most important thing for the constructors, for all the teams. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about budgets. We're talking about caps here. We're talking about how much time you can spend on the aero chassis. And you just need these drivers to obviously come in and make the best out of it. Stroll evidently didn't do that. And yeah, to be honest, I mean, he's still in the seat next year, but I'm sure we all know why. But honestly, as a Formula One driver, this is just, in my opinion, is clearly unacceptable when you're trying to be one of the best 20 drivers in the world. This is just not it. Right, for 21st, I think also not really much of a surprise is Sergio Perez. He's had a really good start to the year. We've got to understand that. I think in some ways we can try to empathize with him, but at the same time, with the experience that he's had, this is just, I think, again, a lot of question marks. Maybe it's a little bit of a bias from me, but I just don't understand how this has happened in general. Is it got to do with the car? Is it got to do with driver confidence? Is it got to do with behind the scenes? At the start of the season, he amassed, I think, quite a huge amount of points. Like, it was 3 digits in the first 5 races, 6 races. And then after that, it just died, and he scored 40 plus points for the rest of the entire season. It's almost as if it was in an Alpine, scoring these occasional points or two, and even Gasly, I think, nearly matched that amount at the end of the day, towards the tail end of the season. Again, another Red Bull driver being booted out when he is partner Max Verstappen, and we talk about Ricardo, we talk about Kvyat, we talk about Albon, we talk about Gasly, now we talk about Sergio. But ultimately, I felt, considering Sergio's experience, again, this has been a poor season from him. Outrightly just poor. Last year, 2023, when the car was really, really up there, just no competition. Again, you can see the score difference, the points difference between him and Max. It was so big, but because the car was so good, he could afford to still, or rather, he could still eke out a P2, P3 finish. But ultimately, you've got to understand that when the car is up there, that high up, and to still have such a big differential, it suggests to me that already, something's wrong with Sergio, and it's shown this year. Again, and this year when everybody was a lot more competitive, McLaren became a lot more competitive, Ferrari became a lot more competitive, Mercedes had their, moments as well, and that just chucked Perez at the tail end of this eight player battle, you can say. Ultimately, among the top 8 drivers, right? I mean, McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, Sergio Perez finished 8th, and I think a considerable amount behind Lewis Hamilton in seventh, if I can remember it correctly. So this shows to me again how diabolical a season Sergio Perez has had. Of course, I think ultimately he deserved to be sacked because of the performances, and Red Bull is, a team that requires high performance from their drivers, and Max has shown it, 4 championships in a row, they don't come by easily. But of course, I think one can put in the argument that, oh my God, Sergio Perez has been this and that. But, Max Verstappen has been the driver of the year for Red Bull, etc. I don't really want to talk about that. I think, that's secondary at this point in time. We'll see what Liam Lawson does in that team. We'll talk about it when we get to him. But Sergio Perez deserves to be kicked out of the team, that's for sure. But yes, ultimately, a terrible season, Sergio. I don't know what his future is going to be like. Maybe Formula E for him. We'll see how, but I am gutted for Sergio because he did so well Racing Point, and that win that he had at the Sakir Grand Prix helped him to stay on for a couple of years. But ultimately, at Red Bull, his time was just diabolical. Maybe again, does he thrive in a team that is of such a high caliber? Maybe he's just more suited to a midfield team, but able to eke out performances. Maybe that's where Sergio stands. But yeah, I mean, it's the end of the story. He's got sacked. That's it. 21st for Sergio Perez. All right, moving on to 20th, I've put in Zhou Guanyu. Now, obviously, scored the only points for Sauber. A fantastic performance from him. I mean, 4 points is very, very good, obviously, considering how terrible the car has been this year. And obviously, his last season as well in Formula 1 for the time being. Whether or not he's going to come back in, I'm not exactly too sure. I think, again, you compare him to Valtteri Bottas, again, I think there's still the huge difference. Obviously, Bottas is a fantastic driver. We all know that. Very, very consistent driver. Whether or not, again, Bottas is World Championship material, I'm not exactly too sure about that. But, first of all, being a second driver, for example, to Lewis Hamilton, he's done his job perfectly. And helping Sauber in some ways, helping Zhou to develop, I think he's done reasonably well as well. I think, yes, to a certain extent, Zhou has obviously closed the gap to Valtteri Bottas. But maybe at the same time, Valtteri Bottas, past his peak, rather, past his prime, and in some sense, he's obviously in a decline. But I think Zhou, a lot of the times, he's been at the back of the field as well. I think when Sargent left and Zhou sort of took over that role to finish last almost in every other race, and a lot of Q1 eliminations, a lot of problems essentially from Zhou. When the car, was starting to get a little bit better, I felt, he didn't capitalize it well enough. I mean, at the same time, when you sort of knew that, you were going to leave already, it doesn't 100% feel like the pressure's off your shoulders. I feel like he was still having a little bit of pressure to perform to the best of his ability, if that makes sense. Like, when you know you're going to lead the team, whether or not it's to a new team or not, usually the pressure's kind of off your shoulders. I mean, Carlos Sainz has evidently shown that. Yeah, but I just think, Zhou just didn't really have a very good season in general. But, what can I say? I mean, he still scored points for Sauber. That's fantastic performance. But that's the highlight, really. But if I look across the entire season, I felt it just hasn't been great for him. Right, P19, we've got Danny Rick now. Obviously, Danny Rick left halfway, gave way for Liam Lawson, and obviously for him, it's like a fairy tale ending. Now a Red Bull. For Danny Rick, obviously, when he came into the RB seat, I think the expectation was quite clear from the fans, and I think from himself, it is to attempt to get into the Red Bull seat because of how we've seen Sergio Perez just not performing. Right, it completely makes sense from that perspective. But obviously, Danny Rick has not been performing. Now, then, if you want to make a comparison between him and Yuki Tsunoda, how their performances have been, I felt was relatively similar. But again, we've got to understand, Danny Rick has been behind the wheel for so many, many years now. And, with a level of experience that we expected from him, we sort of try to feel, and I think as fans, we try to understand or maybe empathise again that, his time at McLaren's a little bit of a one-off, again, maybe the car didn't suit him, etc. Because, again, you must understand that drop-off from Renault to McLaren, that drop-off was massive. Again, Lando was just wiping him off the floor. But he came to this RB, didn't exactly do stellar performances. Yes, the Miami sprint was great, but then go back to the race and it was just like, oh, back to square again. So, again, lack of consistency from Daniel Ricciardo. And obviously, the performances they've been putting in was not good because Yuki Tsunoda was still scoring a good amount of points, and that obviously resulted in him, having to leave as well. I mean, yes, very emotional after the Singapore Grand Prix, that being his last entry. But, I think the results don't lie. Ultimately, what happens on the racetrack happens on the racetrack. And that is where the biggest performance factor comes in, whether or not you're going to keep your seat or whether or not you're going to get promoted in some way or another. That, to me, is one of the biggest factors that any team has to consider. Of course, personality, etc., will come into play. But, you look at that and you've got to understand that it's not the Daniel Ricciardo that we've seen, a couple of years back. Again, I mean, there's a lot of what ifs, was the move to McLaren right? Was this move, moving away from Red Bull, was it the right thing, etc.? I don't know, and I don't want to know, and I don't think I can comment on that because obviously what has happened has happened. But ultimately, I think, not a good season as well for Danny Rick. Yeah, and obviously, I think we are very fully aware of what happened after that. But yeah, P19, I think it's not the worst, but yeah, evidently not the best either because I think we expected more from him. Right, P18, we've got Esteban Ocon ST Bestie. Now, obviously, he's going to be moving to Haas next year, and he had to miss the last race of the season because of a certain thing that Haas and Alpine have agreed upon. Obviously, that allowed Jack Doohan to have one race early prior to next season for Alpine. But Ocon, the season with Alpine, again, got dominated by Pierre. Again, showed to me that it's not good enough again from Esteban. How is he going to fare against Oliver Behrman? I really, really don't know. And Oliver Behrman, in my opinion, looks really bright. So obviously, you've not seen Behrman's name here yet. That would suggest that I've rated Behrman pretty highly, at least compared to Esteban. I think this isn't the best of Esteban that we've seen. We've seen a better Ocon last year. We've seen what he can do. Obviously, the podium, the second place was the highlight again of the season. But again, looking in it, across the season, I felt that it just hasn't been great for Esteban. And I think a lot of the confidence has gone this year. Maybe the incident with Monaco played a part as well. I think that was probably the biggest factor of him getting booted out. But I just think he's not a bad driver. I just think, yeah, could it be got to do with consistency? Maybe. But I think, yeah, because we're comparing it to teammates again. I just think Gasly has had a superb season this year. It emulates, when he was at AlphaTauri back then, 2021, the season that he won a race at Monza, and the season after that. Those two seasons, I think, were pretty good for him. Obviously, I think the winning season was one of the strongest ones as well. But yeah, I think, I hope to see a better Ocon next year at Haas. I mean, the car is looking pretty competitive under RU. He's done pretty good job this year. Are you at Haas? The team principal. So yeah, I just think Ocon, he's got to dig deep for next year. Definitely, he's got to pick himself up. I think it's good that he's got a seat again next year. I think he's not a very bad driver. It's just that he just needs to dig in and dig deep and find a performance again in him. Right, P17, I've put in Liam Lawson. Now, okay, I think we've got to establish the fact that Liam Lawson is not a bad driver. And I think he sort of established himself as a pretty decent driver. I mean, if you look at last year, he sort of come in again for a couple of races when Daniel Ricciardo had an injury to his wrist at the Dutch Grand Prix. He's come in. Lawson did well, out-qualifying Max Verstappen at Singapore, obviously that being a fluke race, but regardless, still out-qualifying Max Verstappen. Scored points as well. This year came in, replaced Danny Rick for a full-time, rather half-season full-time, and still did a really, really good job compared to Yuki Tsunoda, was really, really competitive. But does he deserve the Red Bull seat? I think that is the biggest question that a lot of people are asking. Again, don't get me wrong, no hate on Liam Lawson in what way whatsoever. His feud with Fernando, I really don't care about it. I'm just looking at it from an experience perspective. I'm looking at it as who probably on paper deserved it more. How is Yuki Tsunoda not in that Red Bull seat? And to be honest, at the very start, they've already cancelled out Yuki's possibility of being upgraded to the Red Bull seat. But they've never shut that door for Liam. Neither did they shut the door for Ricciardo at first until he got booted out and Liam came in. And at the end of the day, Tsunoda was never in the equation. And that sort of raised a lot of eyebrows, including mine, because I just think that to me just doesn't make sense. How have you just allowed that to happen? Yuki Tsunoda has been as consistent as he is. Of course, I think maybe his maturity's got to play in. He's not been the most mature driver ever, but he's developed so much over these past 4 years, and he's shown what he can do behind the wheel. I mean, I'm not saying Liam Lawson's a bad driver, but has Liam shown enough to show that he deserves to be in that seat? I am not too sure. I felt that they've had a lot better options at the end of the day. Maybe Sainz was possible, but of course they still tried to give Sergio a chance, and obviously then that sort of backfired. But would Valtteri Bottas have been a decent option as well? You know, he has experience, plays a fantastic second driver, which I feel like that's exactly what Red Bull need. I mean, I don't think people have talked about Bottas to Red Bull. I think it sounds weird, but when you look at it in that way, you know, Bottas experience that he's having, that he has, and how good he's been of a second driver, it's to me it's also like a little bit of a no-brainer unless Valtteri decides to decline that. Maybe that has happened too. But I don't know if Bottas was ever in the realms of consideration. But Liam Lawson in that seat, I don't know. I mean, he could just surprise the world next season and somehow beat Max Verstappen, which I think would be mental. And if he does that fair and square, Red Bull have gotten themselves a gem. But then you have two number one drivers and you probably have a McLaren situation. But as of now, I don't know. I don't see how he deserves that seat. I think he's done little to prove himself that he deserved to be there. But he is there. So he's got to make the best out of it. Otherwise, you know, he could see himself being like Gasly, being like Albon, you know, just getting booted out just like that, getting Kvyat. Will he have the same amount of time as Sergio to prove himself? I'm not too sure either. But I think I'm more intrigued to see what Liam's going to do next year in their Red Bull. I think it's very, very interesting to see how he's going to work with Max and how they're going to sort things out there. Yeah, it's definitely confirmed. I mean, it's a silly season for sure, but this is, yeah, one of the news that I didn't expect to receive. Of course, I said Perez leaving Red Bull, I think that's more expected, but Lawson to Red Bull, I didn't see that coming. Right, in 16th, I've put Oliver Bearman. Now, maybe one can argue it's quite a high rating, but I think one must understand that Bearman, when he got into that race in Ferrari, obviously still in F2, had the race at Saudi, Jeddah, last minute, Carlos Sainz couldn't make it. Bearman last minute, you know, sub in, scored points for Ferrari, got in the Haas car, managed to out-qualify Nico Hulkenberg, I think, and still managed to score points. He's just like, you know, just driving essentially. And again, I'm not exactly too sure if there was any pressure in him, because I feel like pressure does really get into drivers, you know, when they're unable to perform. Largely got to do with the pressure that they put into themselves, and that results in something. But I'm quite positive about Bearman. I mean, if these three races, the performances that we see, then yes, that will be great for Haas next year. I think they'll be super competitive in him and Ocon, especially if Ocon starts to find his foot again, you know, starts to keep the ground running at Haas as well. We really could see Haas, you know, back to where they were when they first joined, you know, the sport. It's going to be very interesting to see Bearman and Ocon next year, how they're going to, as I said, how they're going to partner, etc. But I think from Bearman's performances alone, you know, 3 races this year, I felt it was pretty good. As I said, if these are the sign of things to come, that's great. And obviously, then one can argue, oh my god, I've put him ahead of Ocon as well in the standings. Yeah, maybe, but you know, 3 races is not a lot of races to look. But if you perform consistently over the 3 races, we're looking at a trajectory here again. You know, Ocon had like so many races, but you know, retrospectively, he's only done well in like 1 or 2 races. So you know, but Bearman has done well in all of the entries that he's entered. So I think just by looking at that, you know, maybe I deserve to put it at 16th in my opinion. Yeah, so I think, you know, from Bearman's perspective, he just needs to really try his best next year. It's going to be fun for him, of course, a learning point, also going to be challenging. I think I'm very excited to see what Bearman can do as well next year. Right, in P15, now, Colapinto. I will say this up front. Had he not crashed as much as he did towards the end of the season, he would have been a lot higher. Does he deserve a seat? I think prior to the crashes that he had, 100% deserved the seat. Ultimately, again, we're looking at crashes as a huge problem for Formula One teams. The amount of money they have to repair for damage is going to be massive. You've got to understand that. You've got to take that into consideration, right? That is big for the teams. And Williams have been the team that have crashed the most this year. And because of that, you know, it really impeded any possible upgrades they could have throughout the course of the season. This wasn't good, 100%, right? But Colapinto has showed that he's able to deliver. As I said, you know, when he got into that car, he immediately performed much better than Logan Sargent, essentially. You know, immediately scored points, was as competitive to Albon as I think we would have expected. And I think that being said, when Sainz comes in, I'll be very intrigued to see how Sainz is going to fare up against Albon. A lot of question marks for next year, which just makes next season a lot more interesting. But yeah, Colapinto, very good. To me at least, I think if he's not as crash happy as he's been towards the tail end, definitely deserved a seat, definitely deserved a shout. Maybe he could have gone for the RB seat, but maybe again the crashes, maybe started to, Red Bull put the handbrake because of that. And I would too, I think it's very dangerous to see a driver constantly crashing like that. Yeah, but maybe unlucky, but some crashes, Brazil, for example, at Las Vegas, I think these are slightly avoidable. I mean, he crashed on the safety car, and then for Las Vegas to just lose that, turning into the apex into the last corner. These are sort of, to me, like driver faults here. Yeah, but don't get me wrong, Colapinto is a bright, bright driver. I hope to see him Formula One again. I hope to see him have a seat. Where is he going to go to? I don't know. But I think, first of all, he has to stop crashing. I think that's the first thing. Right, 14th, I put K-Mac. K-Mac hasn't really had a very good season, don't get me wrong, again, until when the Haas car started to really pick up consistent points. And again, towards the end of the season, he was able to perform to a very good extent, was really close to Nico. And again, could be due to the fact that, again, when there's no pressure off your shoulders anymore, you're going to leave the team. It is what it is already. He's come in to Haas most of his Formula One career, and I thought he's done a reasonably good job. I think this season has shown that he's had his downs, but he also had his ups. Of course, sometimes he did out-qualify and outperform Nico, which I think is fantastic, right? Yeah, so hasn't been the worst season for K-Mac. I felt it was a pretty good season, in my opinion. I mean, he had 2 years, I think, with Nico. Was it? I can't remember at this point. 2 years? Was Nico in the team last year as well? I think so. I like to think that. I think I'll check it when I'm editing again. But yes, great season from Magnussen. In general, I felt it was an upward trajectory essentially. Had some highlights, as I said, and I think just a very illustrious career regardless. Even yes, the only podium he had was his very first race, and that was pretty much it. But still, I think he's done a lot in Formula One. I think he's achieved quite a bit in Formula One. I think for himself as a learning curve, and as far as that journey, of course, he didn't achieve, the dream of being a world driver, a champion. But still, I think the season is not too bad from K-Mac. Would I have kept K-Mac if I had a choice in Haas? I think I'll be sitting on the fence. I mean, considering, I have Ocon, I have Behrman to choose from. Maybe a little bit of youth exuberance might be something that I would opt for as well. Well, I don't feel that K-Mac would necessarily fit into the bigger picture of the team. And yeah, maybe even if unless K-Mac's going to do superbly at Haas, I just don't think that he was going to stay at the sport next year again, to be honest. But I don't know where K-Mac's going to go next year. I think maybe he's posted it already. I can't remember. But still, I think a relatively good season from K-Mac. Great, relatively good, depending on how you want to see it. But yeah, of course, I think K-Mac has a very good career as well in Formula One. And I wish him all the best. P13, Valtteri Bottas. Very, very, very unlucky to not score any points this season because of how good Sauber car has been. But again, Bottas has had a really, really good season, really, really consistent when performances needed to be performed or needed to be found. He found performance in the car, and a lot of the DNS, I felt it wasn't his fault. A lot, I didn't say all. Bottas just had a very consistent season this year, and I felt like he is just unlucky for him to not have a seat next year. Yes, he's now a Mercedes reserve driver. He's back at Mercedes again. But again, remember, he got kicked out of Mercedes to pave way for George Russell. To sort of go back there as a reserve driver, I don't exactly know what's going to happen. And now Mercedes have Russell and Kimi Antonelli. And with Bottas' age, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to sort of fit into that picture, the Mercedes picture again, unless somehow, one of Russell and Antonelli just don't perform for next season, which, I mean, Russell, I don't exactly think is going to happen. Antonelli, I think maybe there are still question marks. How Bottas is going to fit into the Formula One picture, maybe that's really just the end, really. He might have a couple of races, thanks to, illnesses or whatever, of other drivers, at the expense of other drivers, but for his own career, I don't know. To me at least, is like a Kimi Räikkönen right now. I feel like Bottas should seek options elsewhere. He can still try to stay at Formula One. I mean, he can take this as a sabbatical, of course, but I just think that, you know, he needs to source for other options if next season, you know, he's not able to have a seat again. Yeah, but regardless, a very good season for Valtteri in my opinion. Right, P12, Alexander Albon. Again, it's a relatively good season. Again, towards the tail end of the season, he just kept crashing, which I felt was not good. But again, don't get me wrong, still a very, very good season here from Albon. Again, very intrigued to see how he would perform next season when, you know, Sainz comes around. How's that going to happen? How's the team going to play? Is he going to get wiped off the floor? I think this would be... I mean, Colapinto has shown that he can really take the fight for it. And I think it was really, really close for to possibilities, you know, of had Colapinto stayed for the whole season and wasn't this crash happy, would he outperform Albon in general? I think there was a possibility. Understand that Albon at Williams have had drivers that just uncompetitive, Latifi and Logan Sargent. Colapinto showed signs of genuinely challenging. And you can see the way Albon performed in the last few races as well. He tried to push for it and obviously couldn't, and results were in crashes. Again, the pressure could be starting to get to him. But when Carlos Sainz comes in next year, I think the landscape of the picture at Williams is definitely going to change, and that will be very intriguing to see. And I think I'm really looking forward to that, to see how Albon puts up a fight against Sainz. And obviously we know Sainz doesn't want to be there, right? He wants to be a better team. But again, you know, Williams become very good next year, which is also possible. But to be fair, they're looking more at 2026 than 2025. So it'll be very interesting to see how these two perform. Still, I think a relatively good season from Albon. I think the points again don't really show it, but hasn't really dipped off very much from 2023. Stayed consistent, but now he's got to up his game, especially when he's going to face Carlos Sainz next year. Right, in P11, before we proceed to the top 10, it is Fernando Alonso for me. Now, obviously not the highs that we've expected from 2023. Of course, the car hasn't been great either, but still, I think he's managed to extract a good amount of performance out of the car. It's just that because the car is so bad, he's not being able to show the quality that he possesses, not able to get the results that I think, you know, would have really pushed him continually up. But I think we've got to understand that some of the drivers this year, they've just performed exceptionally well, and he's not just Alonso. And yeah, I think for Alonso, it's just because of the car that's let him down this year that's, to me at least, have put him down at this particular ranking. I think, you know, if had his performance been as good as, you know, the 2023, had the car been as good as the one in 2023 for the first half, at least at bare minimum, yeah, confirm Alonso would be definitely a top 5 driver this year, because I know what he can do, and I think a lot of the fans are fully aware of what he can do at the wheel when it comes to, you know, getting the best out of the car. So that's my take on it. Yeah, and that will wrap up before we head into the top 10. Right, that'll be it for now. I realize the video is actually going for pretty long, and we still have the top 10 to go, so I don't really want this video to exceed like an hour. So we're going to stop it. It's an unprecedented part 1 of part 2 now. But yes, there will be part 2. I don't know when the part 2 is going to come out. I'll try to get it as fast as I can. I mean, recording this immediately after this. It's about when I can get the video out, looking at the schedule, etc. But again, I guess it can keep you a little bit on your toes, and it's just a bit of fun with the postseason yap. But that'll be it for this one. Top 10 will come when it comes, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I think you know who are the rest of the 10 drivers left, and maybe you can make your own predictions where I've decided to rank them as well. But thank you very much for watching this one. Of course, drop a like on the video if you guys have enjoyed. Of course, subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys for part 2. Until then, goodbye.